Maybe pop the microphone right here. See if that works. Hi, that's kind of unsightly. 3 weeks ago, I got to the UK and I needed to go to Westfield for some chores. I ended up filming this. I wasn't planning to film anything today, but I have to share this with you guys. I slept for 15 hours after my crazy journey back from the US to the UK. And I'm currently at Westfield in Stratford. Guys, London is one of the best cities in the world. Do you know why? Because we have people from literally every corner of the planet in this one city. There's obviously problems that come with that too when you've got such a melting pot of different people. But for the most part, it's a positive as long as people see it as a positive. So as you can see, first of all, I look dead tired in that clip, I know, and I was tired. But diversity should be a source of joy. Obviously, not everybody agrees with that. So a few days after I filmed that clip is when all the race riots started in the UK. I was sick at this point, so I wasn't really leaving the house too much. So I was just in recovery mode. And I saw all these scenes online. I saw these mobs of people burning down cars and breaking into places and being abusive and aggressive towards people of color. And I realized that I needed to speak on this. There's something I can add to this conversation, and I hope you'll stick with me through this journey in the video. So we have this situation where we have a lot of different immigrants from all over the world in the UK, and we have a group of people who are not okay with that, and in extreme acts of violence have made that clear. And there's different levels of this. Some people are only saying that they don't want illegal immigration into the UK. Some people are saying they don't want any immigration into the UK. And so it's not entirely clear what the agenda is. It's clear that they have a negative feeling towards immigrants in the UK. So I've heard a lot of rhetoric in this realm that the UK is a white British country and therefore white British people belong here, everybody else doesn't belong here. So that's sort of the rhetoric that we've got here. And I have all these notes written down, like I said, and so I've thought about this a lot. I've spent hours and hours and hours planning this video. A lot of effort has actually gone into this video, so please do give it a like. To understand why there are so many immigrants in the UK, I'm going to tell you my story, at least a slightly abbreviated version of my story. I'm just going to touch on the parts that are relevant to this particular video. So I was born in Sri Lanka, and I'm actually going to go back even further. Sri Lanka was one of the countries that was colonized by Western European countries, like most of the world. Sri Lanka was first colonized by the Portuguese, then the Dutch, then the British. So they kind of fought over the island, and the British left Sri Lanka in 1948. But the way that the British left Sri Lanka didn't lend itself to the island becoming a peaceful nation. So let me go back a step and tell you that in Sri Lanka, there are two main ethnic groups. There's a few minorities as well, but for the purposes of this video, there are two main ethnic groups. There are the majority Sinhalese, who are Buddhist, and then the minority, a large minority of Tamils, who are Hindu. And when the British reigned over Sri Lanka, they put Tamil people into positions of power, and Tamil people were sort of the prosperous ones. When the British left, the majority Sinhalese took charge over the island, and so the government of Sri Lanka was made up mostly of Sinhalese people. Obviously, at this point, Sinhalese people were feeling quite resentful towards Tamil people, and this is due to the British way of conquering places. And when I say conquering places, there is very little land on the earth that wasn't touched in some way by Western colonialism. So if we just look at the wider picture for a moment, Western colonialism conquered every single country in the world, or the countries were in the sphere of influence of Western colonialism, bar 4 countries, right? There are only 4 countries that we can say were not touched in some way by Western colonialism. So I have this map from Vox to show you guys, which shows you all of the countries that were colonized by the Western European countries, those few countries, the UK, France, the Netherlands, Belgium, Spain, Portugal. Those are kind of the main countries that are responsible for Western European colonization. So we are in Sri Lanka, the British leave, they leave, the Sinhalese people take charge, and they obviously are resentful because of the British divide and conquer way of colonizing the island. And so now we have a situation where Tamil people are oppressed in Sri Lanka. So for decades and decades, Tamil people were not given the same rights in terms of education, employment, housing, things like that, basic human rights. So Tamil people were second-class citizens in Sri Lanka. So now we've got tension brewing between Tamil people and Sinhalese people. And in 1983, a war broke out in Sri Lanka, which was led by the Liberation Tigers of Tamil Eelam. This is a group, the LTTE, of Tamils who wanted freedom from the Sri Lankan government. Their goal is to, and it still is their goal, is to get a chunk of the island that is theirs. So the north and east of Sri Lanka, for the north and east of Sri Lanka to belong to Tamil people as their own nation, since they don't have the equal rights that they deserve in Sri Lanka currently. The Sri Lankan government fights back against the LTTE. They don't listen to what the LTT is saying. The LTT is a militant form of freedom fighting, and so the government started fighting back, and that's how a war broke out in Sri Lanka. So the war went on from 1983 to 2009. All of this is relevant to the race riots in the UK right now, so stick with me. So we have this war going on, 1983 to 2009. My parents are from either side of this. So my dad is a Sri Lankan Tamil, my mom is a Sri Lankan Sinhalese. And so they fell in love and they got married in 1990. So in the middle of all the warring, they fell in love and got married. And that for me is still such a source of pride. That truly was a revolutionary love because it was unheard of, right? In Sri Lanka, having a Tamil person marry a Sinhalese person, it was radical. And they then had me, and I was born in Sri Lanka in 1991, still during the war. And it was unsafe, obviously, for my mom and my dad to be there as a couple. It was unsafe for me to grow up in Sri Lanka as a baby who's half Tamil, half Sinhalese. They lived in a minority Christian area of Sri Lanka, and they ended up leaving Sri Lanka in 1992 when I was a baby, when I was 1 year old. And they made this treacherous journey from Sri Lanka to Europe where they were seeking safety. Now, a lot of people are going to say here, why Europe, right? That's a question I see all the time. Why is it that immigrants are going from, and this story is my story from Sri Lanka, but this story is the same across the world. In formerly colonized countries, there is destabilization of societies. There is wars. There are all kinds of problems in those countries that are a direct response to colonialism. So the colonialists, they didn't leave those countries in a situation where those countries could thrive. They left them in disarray. And so we feel the impact of colonialism even today in countries all over the world. So why are they coming to Europe, right? This is also another piece of the puzzle that so many people don't seem to understand. If we really take a look deeper at what colonialism actually was, what Western European colonialism actually was, a subjugation of black and brown people around the world on the basis that white Western European are culturally and racially superior to everybody else in the world, which is quite, I mean, that's quite an endeavor, right? That's quite something. It's quite a mentality to take around the world with you. And so white Western Europeans went around the world, including to places like Sri Lanka, and they told people for 500 years that they are racially and culturally inferior to white Western Europeans. That's going to have an impact, right? That is going to have a lasting impact on the psyche of black and brown people around the world. So around the world, we still have this system of white supremacy. The idea that whiteness is better than black or brown. And this was instilled into the minds of black and brown people as well. And so whether you are white or black or brown, it doesn't really matter. If you were educated in a institution that's born of colonialism, and so that is every single Western institution and also many institutions in the global South, you're going to grow up with the mentality that somehow whiteness is superior to everything else, that whiteness is somehow normal and everything else is different or strange, right? And critically, these countries were robbed of their resources. So Western colonial countries, that's the UK, France, I've said them all before, the little group of six, the little gang of six in Western Europe, they are the ones who took all of the resources from the global South, from places like Sri Lanka, and they robbed these countries of so much wealth. In material terms, we're talking trillions and trillions and trillions of dollars. Okay, so I went ahead and I asked ChatGPT kind of a vague question, deliberately vague, trying not to make too many typos. How much wealth was stolen from former colonies during, during Western colonialism in total? Now, I know this is an extremely vague question. I just wanted ChatGPT to vomit some information out at me to get some facts into this video. And so I'll highlight some important bits here. So, for example, India under British rule, they think nearly $45 trillion was stolen between those two dates there. Then there's a statistic there about global impact, and it says 14 trillion. The African continent was heavily exploited, of course, not just of resources, but also people during the slave trade. In Latin America, so much silver and gold was extracted, which also then suggests a huge amount in terms of material wealth. Of course, it's very difficult to estimate exactly how much wealth was stolen because there's some things that we can't really put a price on. In total, wealth stolen during Western colonialism could easily be in the tens of trillions of dollars, if not more. And so we're talking a huge disruption at a massive scale, one that we don't often reflect on in the UK. So that wealth is now in Western Europe. Western Europe is built off of colonialism, directly as a consequence of robbing the rest of the world of its resources and of taking black and brown bodies around the world, right? We're talking slave trade, we're talking moving brown people from the Asian subcontinent to Africa for labor. We're talking this mass movement of people and resources around the world for the sole purpose of making Western European countries richer. So in this video, I'm not trying to blame anybody, right? I'm just trying to paint a picture of colonialism that perhaps people haven't told you before, right? We miss a lot of this in UK schools. In UK schools, colonialism is barely touched in the curriculum. So this is something that might have fallen off the radar for many people in the UK, whatever color you are, right? Wherever you're from, this might be something, a point that might have been missed. So that's point number one in terms of a huge impact of colonialism. Point number two is that they subjugated people and made them speak their language, right? In Sri Lanka, people speak English in the cities, not because English is a beautiful poetic language, but because they were violently forced to speak English by the British during colonialism. Right? And so the same goes for many African countries, off the top of my head, Ghana, Malawi, Zambia, Tanzania. These were all British colonies in the past. And so people do learn English there as a language because of colonialism. Same with Portuguese in Mozambique and Angola, or German in parts of Namibia, or Dutch in Suriname, you know, or French in Gabon, I believe. So people speak English, French, Dutch, German in other countries around the world because they were violently forced to speak those languages during colonialism. So if you're following me at this point, you'll notice that there's a very good reason why people are moving from their countries to the UK specifically, or you can even talk about France or Spain or Portugal. It's because, one, there is a huge wealth gap in the world that colonialism caused, with the majority of wealth being in Western European countries. So people are migrating here for economic opportunities. Colonialism caused destabilization, wars and conflicts around the world as well, and therefore people are moving here for safety. And why here? Because they speak the language, right? So if we talk about my story a little bit more, my parents moved from Sri Lanka to France at first to seek asylum in France, but they couldn't find asylum in France. They weren't given asylum in France. So they had to move to Holland, the Netherlands. So I grew up as a Dutch kid in the Netherlands between the age of 4 and 10. So for 6 years, I was like walking around. Dutch was my first language. I was a little Dutch Sri Lankan child, walking around. And of course, I was a kid. So when you're a child, you pick up languages like that, right? It's so easy for children to pick up languages. But my parents were struggling with the Dutch language. And so they moved to the UK because they could speak some English, because Sri Lanka is a former British colony. So now we have established, let me just check my notes. So now that we've uncovered why there are so many black and brown people in the UK and why people migrate here specifically to the UK, why do we have so much division in the UK? Why is there so much tension between white British people and black and brown people? And for that matter, why is there so much tension between black and brown people and black and brown communities? Let me cover that one. That one's easy. So what colonialists love to do is divide the local populations. So they would say, you're one group, you're another group, you're another group. So they have successfully divided black and brown people, all melanated people around the world, and divided them and told them that they don't belong with each other. And so there is definitely anti-blackness within the South Asian community in the form of colorism, where darker skinned South Asians are looked down on, but also anti-blackness in the sense that we South Asians have been told to look down on black people, right? So we need to eradicate that within our communities. So as a Sri Lankan person, I will always advocate for eradicating anti-blackness from the Sri Lankan community. And that's an effort that needs to come from in-house, right? So if you're watching this and you are brown and you're noticing the anti-blackness within your community, it's on us to eradicate that. So if you hear somebody in your community speaking badly about another group of brown people, stamp it out, speak up, use your voice. Your voice has a lot of power and people will listen. So why do we have so much division in the UK? So we're going to talk about colonialism and the education system in the UK. I went through the UK education system, right? From the age of 10, I grew up in the UK. So I did 1 year in primary school, and then the entire secondary education was at a really good school in the UK. The downside for me personally was that it was mostly lots of white middle class people. And so I remember feeling very unseen, unheard, not really room being made for my perspective. And I was expected to just kind of follow the status quo. And so there's lots of moments of discomfort that I can recall from going to this school. But academically and in terms of my literacy skills and numeracy skills and things like that, I was very lucky to have that kind of guidance and education. The education system in the UK is hopeless when it comes to colonialism because it's not even mentioned, right? We don't even talk about colonialism in the UK. And when it is mentioned, on the occasion that we do touch on colonialism, it's from the perspective of the colonizer, as in the UK, and what benefits did the UK gain from having colonized the entire world. It's barely mentioned, and when it is mentioned, it's from the perspective of almost that it was a benefit, that it was like a good thing. So at best, you leave the UK education system not really knowing anything about colonialism. At worst, you leave believing that it was on balance a good thing. And so that's sort of the rhetoric that I've been exposed to from even close friends of mine. You know, it's all about this balanced argument of colonialism. Oh, like, yeah, I know white supremacy is bad, and you know, it was bad, all the terrible torturous things that we did to people of color, that was really bad. But on balance, now you've got sport and railways in Sri Lanka, which seems very out of touch with what actually occurred during colonialism. Colonialism was a violent takeover of so many countries in the world. As I said, almost every country in the world was in some way influenced by Western colonialism. And it's the system that we still live by today. And I'll come on to that later in the video. What's happened is that people in the UK simply are not educated on colonialism because the system of education in the UK is steeped in colonialism and colonial rhetoric, whether it's the schools that we go to or the universities that people go to. So you can do an entire history degree in the UK and still not really understand colonialism, because the institutions through which we learn colonialism, the voices that are platformed, the authors that are recommended, everything kind of continues to uphold a colonial narrative. Colonialism was one of the worst atrocities committed on the earth to people of color. Colonialism was violent. Colonialism was torturous. Colonialism was a supremacist system based on white supremacy, Western supremacy. The idea that Western countries were better than other countries, that our systems in the UK were better than those in Sri Lanka, that white skin is better than brown skin, that white brains were better than black and brown brains, right? The idea that white people were more intelligent, were more beautiful, generally better in every single sense of the word, right? That's what supremacy means. So literally, white Western colonialism, not good. There is no room for a balanced argument as far as I'm concerned. It should never have happened. We wouldn't ask anyone for a balanced argument for slavery or a balanced argument for the Holocaust. We simply agree that those were terrible atrocities committed by humanity and that we learn from them and we don't repeat them. And yet with colonialism, we're asked for a balanced argument. We're asked to see the other side of this. And that just doesn't sit right with me. If some people might say, oh, there's an economic argument for it, but the moral argument always trumps the economic argument. There is nothing we should be doing if it's economically profitable but morally wrong. I hope we're all on the same page, because otherwise you're kind of on the wrong channel, I think. Having said that piece about what colonialism actually was, we can then think about how colonialism shows up in the modern world. In the modern world, the system that we live under today is still a remnant of colonialism, a capitalist world, and we'll come on to capitalism a little bit later on as well. We live in this world that is white supremacist, Eurocentric, Western-led. And there is this other truth that I'd like you to consider, that all humans are looking for safety. All humans are looking for safety, regardless of their skin color, regardless of their background. At a primal level, we all want safety. So what do black and brown people do in the modern world to find safety? There are two ways in which black and brown people find safety in this kind of colonial paradigm. Black and brown people can find safety by joining forces and living within this system, by accepting this system and finding some freedom and space within that system. So by climbing a career ladder, by becoming CEO of a company, by becoming Prime Minister of the UK, perhaps, right? So by seeking power, money, status, some kind of proximity to whiteness, black and brown people can find safety. If you ever find a conservative black or brown person, they have sought safety by essentially joining the oppressor and becoming part of the problem, quite frankly. So if you're black or brown and you're conservative and you've abandoned your history and your country's history and your people's history, and you've decided to join forces with whiteness and have decided that this system is it works for you, the system is still oppressing people of color around the world. So those black and brown people, they have sought safety by seeking proximity to power and whiteness. Other black and brown people, like myself, we try to find solidarity. All people, whether black, brown, white, there are oppressed people around the world living under this colonial paradigm and this colonial system. And so we find solidarity with those people, we find safety with those people, we talk to each other, and we have relatable experiences. We experience racism, we experience discrimination, we experience this feeling of being unwanted or an idea that we are somehow inferior in the eyes of whiteness. And we seek solidarity and we seek to educate people, we seek to dismantle the system, change it by making it safer for black and brown people. So what we need is to find safety and belonging with each other, right? So all black and brown people and white people as well, who understand that this system does not work for them either, can all come together and we can become this big collective that seeks safety with each other, not by seeking power and money and prosperity within the existing system, because we understand that this existing system is an oppressive force. So instead of becoming part of that oppressive force, we can seek solidarity and build our own systems, right? Part of building a new system is ignoring the existing system and living in community with people within your own kind of mini system. There is so much to say on this topic, and I'm gonna make future videos about this as well and go into more detail about some of the things I've mentioned in this video. Since this is a whistle-stop tour of why there are so many race riots in the UK right now, I'm gonna jump to the idea that all people who are educated in the West, whether you are white, black, brown, it doesn't really matter, we need to understand colonialism for what it was, and we need to understand the impact of colonialism today. There is a beautiful diagram that I want to show you guys right now. This diagram was made by a doctor, and she links colonialism, capitalism, and white supremacy to many other issues in the world, including trauma and inflammation and illnesses. Everything is connected, you guys. Sometimes I feel like that guy, that meme from Always Sunny in Philadelphia with the red string, making all these connections between all these different topics that are apparently all unrelated, but actually they're all connected to each other. So black and brown people are at more risk of certain diseases, inflammation-based diseases, autoimmune diseases, for example, because of the trauma of our ancestors. So those of you who understand generational trauma will understand this. Colonialism was a traumatic event for the global south. And so anybody who was around during colonialism and being subjugated by white Western imperialists would have been traumatized. And that trauma is then passed down generations. And so all black and brown people living today are still suffering in their bodies, in our DNA, from the trauma that was imposed on us during Western colonialism. And so part of the task of black and brown people is to heal that trauma in your own body. We can take ownership and take our power back by listening to our body, by understanding our body, by understanding our trauma, by delving deep and unpacking the feelings of discomfort that you've probably experienced your whole life. Because if you live under this system as a black or brown person, it is uncomfortable. And so many black and brown people will ignore it. They will brush it under the rug because maybe they've been told that's what you do with uncomfortable feelings. But the more we do that, the more the traumas will show up in our body as inflammation and as certain diseases Decolonial work is linked to healthcare, is linked to spirituality. It's all connected. What we can do as Black and brown people is start our own healing journeys. And I'll do lots and lots of videos on my own healing journey and how we can feel comfort in our bodies whilst having these conversations as well. So in this video, I am calling in all people, right? And I'm not going to discriminate. Doesn't matter. If you are on this journey with me, you're in this group of people who are trying to heal the world, who are trying to show love to the world. So if you are white British, your task is to educate yourself on colonialism. Really try to read books by authors from the global south. Read the perspective of the colonized, because that's a perspective that is so often overlooked in the UK education system. Listen to your Black and brown friends. Listen to when they want to speak to you about these super important issues. If they're talking to you about it, it means they care. It means that they are trying to call you in to do better in an oppressive world. White working class British people get the brunt of this. I think quite often they're called racist, far right nationalists, and the views are problematic. But white working class British people are suffering too, right? So yes, the views are problematic. Yes, the behavior is problematic and harmful. They themselves are suffering though. They themselves are victims of this oppressive system. So I'm talking here mostly to white middle class people who have the time and the energy and the resources to educate themselves. So we need that silent majority to start educating themselves and to start using their voice to change the system. So that's huge. That's a big thing there. So the task of Black and brown people is to heal your traumas, go within. Keep touching my mic. Go within and start listening to your bodies. When you're moving through the world and uncomfortable things happen to you, don't be silent about them. Start speaking out about them, because if you're silent about them, all that energy is just being suppressed into your body, and it's going to show up in the form of disease. We need to start speaking up. We need to start taking up space. We need to start talking to them about these issues. And this isn't easy, right? It's not easy at all, because in my own experience, I'm going to put in a couple of anecdotes here. In my own experience, talking to white British people about colonialism is like squeezing blood from a stone. It's very, very difficult work. I've had experiences with friends who I've known for a long time. One friend comes to mind who I've known for nearly 2 decades. And I was trying to talk to them about colonialism, about racism, about white supremacy, and they were having none of it. You know, there was this air of, hey, I already know what I'm talking about. Oh, that's a fly. I already know what I'm talking about. I'm not part of the problem. So why are you attacking me? And I had to really show patience. You know, you really have to make room for their discomfort. But there comes a point as well, you know, there's a balance between calling in your white friends and also knowing when to preserve your energy. If you've got a white British friend and they are receptive to talking to you, by all means, go speak to them, go call them in, because they can be an ally to the cause. If they are not receptive, just know when to preserve your energy, because it can be draining trying to bring people into this who are resistant. Moving on, I'm still going through my notes, you guys. One thing as well that is a common misconception is that colonialism ended, right? When Britain left Sri Lanka in 1948, that was the end of colonialism. Of course, that's not true, right? Colonialism never ended. Colonialism is still very much present with us today. It's changed form. So colonialism has transformed and we now call it by a different name. But we are still extracting resources from the global south at an unfair price. We are still using the labor of people from Black and brown countries around the world that are paid a pittance for their labor, and the comforts that we live by in the Western world. So all of the luxuries that we have in the Western world are because of the oppression of people around the world. We call it by a different name. It's called capitalism. We are exploiting people and resources and animals and the natural world in the name of profit. So we're extracting wealth from the global south, and it's being poured into Western countries, right? And of course, the US is a big part of this now too. So Western Europe, the US, Canada, New Zealand, Australia, all of the white Western countries and their subsidiaries, as I like to call them, they are all still profiting off the labor and exploitation of black and brown bodies around the world. So black and brown people around the world are still being exploited. Okay, so we have come a very long way. We've gone on a huge journey together. So we now know why there are so many black and brown people in the UK. We now know why black and brown people are oppressed around the world. We now know why so many white British people mean well, have great intentions, and think they are the good ones, but are still part of the problem. And we know why there are many white working class people who haven't had the opportunity. I mean, and I'm not trying to blame anybody. I want to stress in this video that I'm not actually blaming anyone for these problems. The only people that I truly blame are the elites, right? The very few people at the top who benefit from this system. Everybody else, we're all in the same boat. Everybody else, black, brown, white, it doesn't matter. We're all part of this big collective, and we all need to do better. We all need to start seeing each other as part of the same team. So I'm not blaming white British people for not knowing this. A little point that I missed actually about the education system. When immigrant children go to the UK and go to UK schools and go to the UK education system, it's almost like we have two education sources, right? We go to a school and we learn from these colonial institutions and we learn the history from them. And it's not accurate. It's from the point of view of the colonizer. Then we go home to our immigrant parents, and our immigrant parents will teach us about colonialism from their perspective, from the perspective of the colonized. And so I used to go home and my parents would tell me about Sri Lanka and about how it was colonized and the exploitation that was going on, the hardships that Sri Lankans still face because of colonialism, which can be very confusing for immigrant children. That's a topic for another video. But essentially we get this clash of information. On the one hand, we're told, oh, colonialism, on balance, it brought a lot of good things to the world. And then at home, we're like, wait, there's all these terrible things that happen to people in Sri Lanka because of colonialism. Whereas if you're white British, you go through the system, and as I said, the system doesn't teach you about colonialism. So white British people, I'm not blaming you for not knowing about these things. You've been robbed of the opportunity to actually understand colonialism because it's not part of the curriculum. At the same time, we have a media that demonizes black and brown people. And so we have the elites, and the elites make our lives very difficult, right? And this goes for white working class people, it goes for black and brown people, it goes for pretty much anyone. Anyone who's struggling in the UK right now, it is the fault of the elites. It's the fault of the establishment, because they are robbing us of our opportunities to thrive in the UK and to live really good, wholesome lives. We have the media then blaming all of those struggles that people go through in the UK on black and brown immigrants. And if you've got this media rhetoric that black and brown immigrants are the reason why, you know, Sally can't find a place for her kid at a primary school, or why John can't find a spot at a hospital for his knee pain or whatever, like, if you've got the media telling you that the reason why you are going through your struggles is because of black and brown people, and you have no understanding of why there are so many black and brown people in the UK, of course your anger and frustration is going to be directed at black and brown immigrants. But really, our anger and frustration should be going to the elites. The government has the power to make our lives better, help us thrive. If we fund our hospitals, if we fund our schools Suddenly, we will have spaces in those places for everybody. The UK isn't full, it's underfunded. So the media also has a huge part to play in this. But of course, who makes up the media? The media is made up of people who were educated in this country through this education system. So if we have workers in the media who are uninformed on colonialism, of course media rhetoric is not going to be accurate or informed. So there's a number of different problems here, but the education system in the UK and the media in the UK are two of the biggest ones as I see it. And so it's on us to educate ourselves. So I'm calling you in this video. I am not trying to alienate, I'm not trying to attack, I'm not blaming you. I'm trying to call people in to be part of the solution. And that starts with actually understanding the world as it is, actually understanding why the systems are in place the way that they are in place. And this video is just the tip of the iceberg, you guys. So I really hope that this tiny whistle-stop tour from my perspective will open your eyes that there is so much more to learn about colonialism and the way that the world works. I had a coffee in preparation for this video because I knew I would get tired talking about this. So there's so much more to say about this, but I hope that today I have given you a glimpse into my brain and how I think about this stuff. This video is essentially a culmination of about 20 years of experiences, of books I've read, of conversations I've had with people, of absorbing the world and seeing the world from my perspective, having grown up in so many different countries and having traveled the world for the last 7 years. I've seen with my own two eyes the impact of colonialism around the world, in Africa, in Asia, in Latin America. And let me tell you, it ain't pretty. So, I'm tired. If you enjoyed this video, if you thought it was informative, if you like the way that I talked about it, please give it a thumbs up. Please subscribe to the channel. I'll be doing more videos about this, but I'll also do more videos about adventures. I have a volcano hike coming up, and I'll talk about diving, and I'll talk about healing. I touch on trauma healing in this video. I'll do more videos on my personal journey in healing my traumas and how we can get in touch with our body. Yoga is, of course, a huge tool for this. So I'll do lots of videos about yoga as well. All right, I'm going to leave it there. That was so much. Thank you for sitting through that. I so appreciate every single like, subscribe, comment, share this video. I think this is a video definitely worth sharing. So share it with anybody who you think might find it helpful to learn about colonialism from this perspective. I want to end with my motto or my philosophy that I live by, which is radical love. This space, this little corner of the internet that I've carved out for myself here, is a space of radical love. We are not blaming anybody, we're not shaming anybody, we are not going to point fingers at people and say you're the problem, you're the problem. No, we are a collective and we are a loving collective and we're all in the same boat. And everybody really wants is safety and love and a sense of belonging. So I hope that helps. And I'd like you to embody love, please, for yourself and for everybody else. Thank you. See you in the next video. I've lost my words. I've lost my words. This is one of the hardest videos I've had to film. This is going to be such a difficult video to film. But it's important, Isha. Come on, you got this.